Jesus taught that we Christians are to be salt and light in the world. Sometimes, though, we don't realize that our good works are making a difference.
People in the pews don't even know this. There's really good news that we have a serious problem, and the good news is the church has been responding.
Today on Weekend Connection, we'll see that faith-based organizations are making a significant impact on homelessness. I'm Vic Gregory, and let's get connected. We see them downtown on a street corner, or perhaps lying on a bench, or maybe walking along an interstate off-ramp. People who are caught in the ravages of homelessness. Homelessness is one of the pervasive social problems facing our cities today. And during a one-night survey conducted in January of 2015, it was found that some 564,708 people were found living on the streets or in homeless shelters. However, there is hope. Recent studies have found that the number of homeless people in America is on the decline. And one large reason for that is the role that faith-based organizations are playing in addressing the problem. Joining me today is Dr. Byron Johnson. He is Distinguished Professor of Social Sciences and Director of the Institute for Studies of Religion at Baylor University. Dr. Johnson, thank you for joining us today on Weekend Connection.
Oh, my pleasure, Vic.
You recently conducted a study for Baylor University which took a look at the impact of faith-based organizations and that impact that they're having on homeless problems in America. What was the goal of your study?
Well, we had hoped to do a national level study where we look at many cities across the U.S., but those kinds of studies are just so time-consuming and expensive, and we wound up doing a study of 11 cities.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal was, if you can't do a national level study, what could you do that would be the next best thing? So we picked 11 cities that kind of gave us a geographical representation of the country, so East Coast, West Coast, North and South. And we wanted to do something that hadn't been done before, and that was to look at the role of faith-based organizations in responding to a real serious social problem. And so that was the goal. You know, what are they doing? How much work are they putting in, and how much effect are they having on a serious social problem that has been an issue for many decades in the U.S.?
Of course, there are government agencies and programs that are also addressing the homeless problem. What is the significant difference between what governments can do for the homeless and what faith-based organizations can do for homeless people?
Well, the big difference is that the government is trying to reduce homelessness, but oftentimes their efforts are geared towards, providing a residence for people that don't have one.
Mm-hmm.
The faith-based organizations have a much more comprehensive approach. They realize that, some of these people have addiction issues, and some of these people obviously have employment issues and other kinds of problems that have, resulted in homelessness. They also recognize that for many of these people, they don't have a church home. And so they see people as people that have a spiritual problem as well as, an economic or financial problem.
Mm-hmm.
So the faith-based organizations are much more holistic in their response. They're interested in treating more than just a symptom.
Right.
So that's the thing that distinguishes them. So if you had someone today from HUD on the phone, they might say, well, we care about those things too. But the real target for them is to see how they can take someone that's homeless and provide for them, help them get a residence, which is an honorable thing. But if you don't treat some of the other issues, then you're never really going to solve the problem. And that's why faith-based organizations, the work that they do is so important.
I read an article in Christianity Today that shared findings from your study, and it cited the example of how faith and marriage, which are nurtured by faith-based organizations, are largely overlooked by government-sponsored programs addressing homelessness. Elaborate on the importance of these types of issues.
Well, we know from decades of research that marriage is a key variable for us. And people that are not married just economically have so many more struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly the point that we're trying to make in this study, is that if you know that these factors, like having a faith commitment and regularly participating in a church where you have all kinds of networks of support that are available to people, these are very much a positive thing, and the government doesn't go there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so the beautiful thing about these organizations is that they not only target those areas, but they still work with government. And that was one of our key findings, is that faith-based organizations actually are willing and able to partner with all kinds of groups. And because they are so willing and capable, they get referrals from the government. And so if you go to Houston, or if you go to Jacksonville, or go to Atlanta or Omaha or Indianapolis, what you'll find on the ground are partnerships that exist between secular groups and faith-based groups. Faith-based groups are wonderful partners. They don't say, you know what, you don't have a faith commitment, you're not faith-based, we're not going to play with you. That's not the attitude of faith-based organizations at all.
Right.
They're great allies in the fight against homelessness, and people all across the country are aware of that. It's just a lot of people in Washington, D.C. don't get that. And that's why if you look at studies published that have been funded by HUD, you'll see very little, if anything, written about faith-based organizations. And that's unfortunate, because the reality is that they play such a huge role. And if you go to any city in America and talk to people in government, go to the mayor's office, they'll tell you that they're on the ground, they're working, they're great partners. And so I think that's another untold story that we want to communicate.
Good, very good. Your study also found that there is a conflict between what many faith-based organizations attempt to accomplish with their programs and the Housing First initiative that is promoted by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. If you would, please take some time and explain that for us.
Well, the Housing First initiative is interesting because, again, it has an honorable goal of providing an address for someone. But there are plenty of people that are addicted to drugs, for example, that participate in Housing First, and yet there's no effort to remedy that problem. And so, you could be a success story because you actually have an address, you're living in a residence, but you're a cocaine addict, you're using drugs, you're not employed, and yet you're a success. According to Housing First. And I think faith-based organizations would say that's fundamentally a flawed analysis. If someone's a drug addict and they're openly using, they're not employed, this is a person that's in real need of help. And so we didn't really know that there was this Housing First push that really is a significant effort by the government, but that when you get out and talk to people in these communities, there are plenty of people that say Housing First just doesn't really approach the problem of homelessness in a way that is beneficial.
We're talking with Dr. Byron Johnson, Distinguished Professor of Social Sciences and Director of the Institute for Studies of Religion at Baylor University, and he is also co-author of a recent study examining the impact of faith-based organizations on homelessness. Dr. Johnson, your study found that relational poverty is a factor that contributes to a significant percentage of those who are homeless. What is meant by relational poverty?
Here again, people like you or me, we have support networks, both in our communities. If we attend a house of worship, we have support and we have relationships. A lot of these people have no relationships whatsoever. If they have family, they may be estranged from their family because of the circumstances they now find themselves in. And so this is what happens with people that, wind up in a situation where it appears they have no hope, and despair sets in. And, one episode leads to another episode, and there's this downward spiral. And so for many of these people, they're simply missing the relationships that so many of us count on every day. And that's why I think the faith-based organizations, again, are so uniquely qualified to step into that space and begin to mentor and nurture people back to health, right, physically and otherwise.
What are some of the other factors? You mentioned things like drug abuse. We've just finished talking about the lack of being connected. What are some of the other factors that contribute to homelessness?
Well, one of the big factors is domestic violence, for example. And, domestic violence is a scourge in our society. Mm-hmm. And so let's just say that you have 3 kids, you live in an abusive relationship, and you want to protect your kids from harm. What do? And so for some women who find themselves in a situation like that, they actually are, their option is to go onto the streets with their kids or to stay in an abusive situation. Mm-hmm. So there's the drug issue on the one hand, there's just plain poverty on another, but domestic violence is something that affects an awful lot of people and drives some people into homelessness.
Your study found that ministries provide about 60% of emergency shelter spots available in those 11 major American cities where you conducted your research. What did your research find regarding those who are being reached by faith-based organizations becoming permanent residents with conventional housing?
To answer that question definitively, you need to do a longitudinal study. Mm-hmm. What we did was kind of a snapshot in these communities. We went in, we collected data, and here's what we found. But what you need to do is to take those same 11 cities, let's say Indianapolis, and you go to these shelters, you find these people, and then you track those people for the next 2 to 3 years.
Right.
So it's not just enough that you find them. That's why the Housing First thing, to me, is so in need of research that would help us understand how are they living their lives since they got this residence, and how long were they able to hang on to that residence? What about employment? And what about other family functioning variables that we need to look at over time? Again, we didn't do that research. We need to do that research. But just being in those cities, talking to people and asking questions, it really does appear that these organizations are effective, or they wouldn't have been there for so many years. That's the other thing. A number of these faith-based organizations, especially the Salvation Army, the Gospel Rescue Missions, they've been on the ground for decades, some of them over 100 years. And you just can't stay on the ground doing that kind of work, all privately funded, without having some measure of success.
Right.
And so, more research is needed to be able to say, here's what happens if you go into Housing First. Here's what's happened if you go into a faith-based approach in the same city. And now we're going to track these people over time to see just exactly how well they do. That's the kind of study that's really needed, I think, to answer some of these more difficult questions.
Well, Dr. Johnson, there's obviously a lot more that we could cover that is addressed by your study, but unfortunately, time doesn't allow us to do that. I know that your complete study has been made available online. If someone wanted to read it, how would he or she go about accessing that information?
Yeah, if people go to BaylorISR.org, that's BaylorISR.org, and you can just click on it, download it, print it out free.
All right, BaylorISR.org. We've been talking with Dr. Byron Johnson, Distinguished Professor of Social Services and Director of the Institutes for Studies of Religion at Baylor University, and he is also co-author of a recent study examining the impact of faith-based organizations on homelessness. And Dr. Johnson, we thank you so very much for your insights and your willingness to join us today.
Thank you, Vic.
That's our broadcast. Next week, we'll examine another topic of interest to the Christian community, and we invite you to join us then for Weekend Connection on BBN.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.